Everyone has a story. These are stories of bravery, cunning, courage, wit, and seemingly impossible odds in the lives of real people. This is episode number 18, 13 Miles from Ground Zero. A morning chill was still in the air at their campsite along the river. Bruce and his girlfriend Sue huddled around the campfire, trying to make coffee while toasting leftover marshmallows for breakfast as they waited for the morning sun to reach down into the river valley. Bruce was 22 at the time and an avid outdoorsman. One of their four friends had already been at the river fishing for steelhead. Terry had been by to tell them about the big one that got away. Their other friends were still in their tents, leaving Bruce and Sue to enjoy the quiet peace of the morning together. It was Sue who first noticed a plume of white smoke above the trees on the ridge. There must be a fire somewhere. The plume rapidly filled the sky, turning yellow, red, then black. The bright blue morning sky transformed into a darkened monster. The campfire flame suddenly blew flat, burning horizontal to the ground. There was no sound of a rush, no sound at all, just a sudden blast of cold air that hit with hurricane-like force. Ice, rock, mud, debris enveloped everything, trapping the world in a shrapnel-filled darkness. Trees began falling all around. As the two campers attempted to take cover, the ground opened up beneath them. Trees near where they were standing were knocked over with such severity that they were uprooted, leaving holes in the ground. Bruce and Sue plunged into a hole left by trees ripped out by their roots. The tree cavity they'd fallen into was pitch black. Neither could see the other. It sounded like cannon fire around them as Douglas fir trees broke as though they were mere toothpicks. As terrifying as this was when it happened, being below ground level spared them a worse fate and ultimately saved their lives. "If you talk to me about any part of it, I can see it like a camera," Bruce recalled. "All the timber came down so fast, in the snap of a finger. We fell into the hole where the trees were uprooted. We thought the whole hill had fallen down on us. Above them, timber snapped over and covering the opening, shielding them from the searing heat that followed. Even at that, their accidental sanctuary grew hotter until it was so hot that it singed the hair on their heads and arms. They found themselves enshrouded by what could only be described as a hurricane of ash and heat. The heat intensified as the two huddled together and it became ever darker around them. Bruce had worked in a bakery. He was familiar with high-temperature ovens. He estimated that the temperature above them approached a searing 500 degrees Fahrenheit. From their protected nest, they could see through the debris above their heads as the sky began to clear again. Eventually, it seemed safe to climb out of the place where they'd been sheltered. As they picked their way out of the fallen timber and climbed back above ground, the scene that met them was surreal. The lush greenery and majestic forest had been reduced to an apocalyptic hellscape, devoid of color and life. Not one tree was left standing. In an instant, the entire landscape had been changed. Their concern turned toward their friends. Bruce and Sue called out, but only two of the four answered. They were both seriously injured. Danny had badly burned hands, and Brian a broken hip. Terry, the fisherman, had taken cover in a tent where his girlfriend had still been sleeping. Both had perished in that tent, now collapsed beneath a fallen tree. Bruce and Sue concentrated their efforts on moving the two friends who survived. Their vehicle was blocked by fallen trees, so they would have to make it out on foot. They decided that Bruce, Sue, and Danny should hike out for help. The thought of being left behind was horrifying for Brian, immobile as a result of his broken hip. "Please don't leave me here to die," he pleaded with them. It was a heartbreaking request, but they knew no alternative. They fashioned a lean-to from logs to protect Brian and gave him assurances they would find help and send rescuers back for him. Danny, the friend who had sustained burns on his hands, had also lost his shoes. Now his feet were being burned almost as badly. He had to hop from one fallen tree to another to avoid the hot ash blanketing the ground, 2 feet deep in some places. They only covered 1.5 miles in the first 2 hours. Danny was slowing them down. Bruce insisted that Danny needed to be left by the river. Danny begged them not to leave him alone, but they needed to move faster to ensure they could get help back to Brian. Bruce and Sue spent the entire day climbing over fallen trees and trudging through burning knee-deep ash without food or water. The wind blew the ash around their faces, burning their eyes. They had no way of knowing if they would live or die. Bruce learned that day that life is a gift. You don't realize how much you want to live until you think you're going to die. Bruce and Sue carried on in this manner for the next 12 hours or more in search of help. Along the way, they were joined by a logger, an old-timer, also looking for a way out. They were hungry, thirsty, and exhausted. They needed to find a bigger road or any point of reference where they could improve their chances of being seen. Rather than wait, Danny had decided to walk down the river on his own. He too encountered a logger who, with his young boys, was also looking for a way out. The logger gave Danny a pair of shoes from his pack and a fruit roll for nourishment. The river water was filled with muddy ash, unsuitable for drinking, but eventually they came upon a spring where fresh water flowed. As Danny began to drink, he noticed water seeping from his neck. The skin was gone. He had been so caked in ash that he hadn't realized how badly he was hurt. After trekking nearly 15 miles, darkness was approaching. Bruce, Sue, and their logger companion were preparing to stop for the night when they heard a helicopter. An observant National Guard pilot had seen their footprints and followed the tracks until he spotted the walkers. They informed the crew about Brian and Danny, but when they showed them where they'd come from on the map, the crew couldn't believe anyone survived there. Bruce and Sue refused to get on the helicopter until they had assurance their friends would be rescued. The date was May 18, 1980. Mount St. Helens erupted and put Washington state in darkness. Mount St. Helens released 24 megatons of thermal energy, 1,600 times more than the atomic bomb that destroyed Hiroshima. The top 1,300 feet of the mountain was gone in an instant, spewing pyroclastic flows across the landscape, superheated gases, chunks of lava, and ash. Everything within 8 miles of the blast was wiped out instantly. Trees, houses, wildlife, barren as the moon. The shockwave rolled over the forest for another 19 miles, flattening trees left lying in neat rows like matchsticks. The area affected by the direct force of the blast encompassed 230 square miles, with denuded trees left standing but seared lifeless by hot air, leaving forests of skeleton trees. Over 4 billion board feet of timber was destroyed. 57 people died, and countless thousands of animals perished. Deer, elk, bears, birds, small mammals, even fish and insects. Melted snow and glacial ice triggered massive mudslides as high as 60 feet that wiped out homes and dammed up rivers. Over 200 homes were destroyed, and more than 185 miles of roads and 15 miles of railways were damaged. Volcanic ash clogged the sewer systems, damaged cars and buildings, and shut down air traffic across the Pacific Northwest. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, it was the deadliest and most economically destructive volcanic event in the history of the United States. There were only a few dozen people within the blast zone who lived to tell about it. Bruce Nelson and Sue Ruff were two of those fortunate people. They'd been rescued along with their companions after walking nearly 14 hours through hot ash and fallen trees from their campsite on the Green River, 13 miles northwest of Ground Zero. And that's their story. And that's how it happened. Wasn't that amazing? I thought so. Bet your friends and family will think it's interesting too. I've just lived long enough to learn that one of the best doorways to a healthy conversation with your kids or anyone else is a good story. I'm Rodney Powell, and you're listening to the Everyone Has a Story podcast, a production of realmedia.us. Meet you back here for the next episode. Everyone has a story.